who even invented this whole dementia thing anyway? And is it really real? Is it really real? I mean, show it to me. What is it really about? All right. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Andy.
Here we are to do this Kernel podcast episode about our experience doing this paper on and the study on personal autonomy for people living with dementia. And we have been at this for several months.
Since last summer.
Since last summer. Wow. Yeah, it's been a long time. And I guess it's time to think a bit about what we learned from this, what it was like. It was a pretty interesting study in a lot of ways. A lot of interesting things to say about it. So I don't know if you have any preliminary thoughts of what you'd like to say about it.
Yeah, I was just looking back on some of our early notes, and one of the things that stood out to me was the shift from the original thought of speaking with care providers, care partners of people living with dementia, not knowing whether we'd be able to actually talk to the people themselves. And we ended up talking almost exclusively to the people themselves. And I think we learned so much that way. It was a really neat opportunity for insight into how people are thinking.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we chose to take that focus. And that was part of, we had a little bit of kind of preliminary training on how to do a study like this, because as you said, it was kind of, we were a bit worried about it. And some people that I spoke to even wouldn't really want to do a study like the one that we did, just for concerns about how would it work. But I agree with you that it was so rich to do it this way. And not only maybe that's the best practice to try to get at the lived experience of people. You want to talk to the people themselves. That's very understandable as a kind of best practice thing. But also in practice, I think it was really rewarding.
Yeah, and the participants loved it. They loved having that undivided attention, people who really cared about what they were thinking and what their lives were like and how they make decisions and carry them out and what feels right to them and why.
Yeah.
They really appreciated the opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, so you did all the interviews. So you were the one kind of like right with people and observing everything. For me, I was listening in and hearing all of the recordings and then going over the transcriptions that were produced as a result. So I still found that to be really fun, but I wasn't like fully immersed in the actual space as you were. And so I don't know if you had any other thoughts about that, about what that was like.
In the moment kind of experience, I really found, perhaps particularly working with people living with dementia, that the interview guide had to just be a guide, a companion along the way of keeping me on track as to what I was hoping to accomplish, but there was a lot of going with the flow.
Yeah.
And really listening and hearing what people wanted to talk about and how they were framing things in ways that maybe we wouldn't frame things.
Yeah.
Storytelling was a really big one that emerged, particularly with our second participant who I tried asking the questions. It felt as though she didn't really hear any of the questions because the answers weren't obviously connected to the questions, and yet so rich. It was all about autonomy. It was all about her life and how she lived it and what she cared about and her agency in life as a whole, not just now, but throughout life. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I found that too to be an incredible example of, because like you said, at first when I was listening to the recording, it seemed to me like to some extent you were asking questions and the responses were just the person speaking about whatever she wanted to speak about. But as we were looking into it and trying to make sense of what was being said, I was amazed how much that actually was giving us insight into what we were trying to investigate, the lived experience of autonomy, even though it didn't seem to be directly answering the questions. Is there any way we could talk about examples of that without getting into details that would compromise anonymity, but like any things that stood out. Do you remember any particularly good ones?
Yeah, I'm thinking of another participant. Oh gosh, so many people come to mind. One who seemed to have really well-rehearsed stories about his life. He was so eager to sit down and talk, and it was obvious that he had told these stories before. And they were important stories for him maintaining his identity and maintaining his autonomy in his current life. He told stories about his family, about his career, about his volunteer work, about who he was and who he still is. He was very new to the home at the time, and so just getting established in a new community where it was really important for him to show people who he was and to live into that.
Yeah.
That's one that comes to mind for me. And it comes to mind for you?
Well, I was thinking back to that first one, or the first two. It was either one or two that we were listening to, and there were a lot of stories about her community and her father, and about the kind of language that was used in her home, and the swearing and joking, and the way that she would still like swear and joke, but she seemed to have an understanding of because of the language use, she was able to kind of navigate through situations that she otherwise wouldn't have been able to with the kind of humor that she was using, and potentially some kind of barriers to things that she might have wanted to do, but because the way that she used language, she would say things like, well, God doesn't like swearing, or I wanted to be a preacher, but
I swore too much.
so I couldn't do that. And then other stories about, just the one story that came alive so strongly for me from that participant was about in a northern Ontario community, and having parents who somehow brought a fridge out to the middle of a field somewhere, and the whole community just gathered around this ice cream that was there, and it might have even been homemade ice cream or something. And how she just described it as this like heavenly banquet that was so joyful, and the whole community was coming around, and people were coming in and playing music, and she said we had more fun than going to a film or going out somewhere. Like, it was just, we wish that the summer would never end.
All about sharing and about everybody being welcome, and making sure that everybody felt welcome. It just seemed to nurture in her this vision of community that she's carried with her through her whole life, and fits so well in a supported living community now. How can we be in a place where we just support each other and care?
Right. Yeah. So those values that were so important to her in her memories and in her formation of who she was, through telling those stories and recounting them and reliving into them, it was like that was how she was maintaining her identity, her sense of who she was, but in a broad sense, her autonomy, in the sense that autonomy is very tied up with your sense of who you are and what your core values are. Like, if we think of autonomy as doing what you truly want to do, how do you know what you truly want to do? It's kind of rooted in, well, who are you?
Exactly. And how do you want life to go? And if life can go like it did in that field with the ice cream, where everybody has enough, and I can be part of that provision for everybody. She's happy.
Yeah. So that was amazing. There's lots of other examples that we could talk about. And to me, in some ways, that's what made this whole thing so rich, was just going deep into hearing the stories and hearing the way people talked about themselves. I was even thinking, because we did a co-design group before we actually carried out the study, and we made sure that we were connecting with some people who were living with dementia as part of our co-design team. And I remember back to that group and just hearing how they were responding to the questions, and we wanted to get feedback on what is this interview guide like? What do you think about it? And the stories that they were telling, I found already so insightful and impactful and like profound, in ways that I just found myself being very moved through the whole experience. I remember one participant was talking about the experience of dementia, and he was just retelling a story from his childhood about being in a place where there was war happening, and the town where he lived was in danger of being destroyed, or like was being destroyed, and his family had to move out of the city into the countryside somewhere. And just that feeling that he was conveying in telling this story about like the powerlessness of it, the lack of control, and just having all of this stuff happening to you, and then you've got this all happening to you, and you're trying to figure out what to do about it, figure out how to live and how to navigate in those contexts that are outside of your control. And I felt like he was telling that story about his experience, but that was his way of telling us what it was like for him to be living with dementia. And I just found that so amazing that someone could just convey that through this metaphor of a real life story that they were telling about themselves. And that was just a big deal to me.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And through that, we really learned the resources that people have within themselves that they've built up throughout their lives for living with dementia, for maintaining a sense of autonomy of life is manageable. I kind of know how to do this because I've done hard things before.
There was a participant who was talking about so many things had happened in his life, had such swift, important sudden changes, drastic sudden changes that would happen about deaths in his family. And it just sort of happened. And there it was. And now your brother, who you lived with, is gone. And sort of through a number of experiences like that, he was sort of learned how to cope with those kind of drastic changes.
Things you can't control.
Yeah. Then talking about some of the experiences that were relevant to his experience living with dementia and some of the changes that were happening, how he was able to kind of roll with it. And he would say things like, that was a small but profoundly life-altering change. And that's what it was. It was a fact. It was a thing that you just deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember some of his words, slightly major.
Slightly major, things like that, exactly, yeah. That were wonderful ways of expressing things.
Yeah.
The language which you would never come up with if you were just trying to theoretically imagine autonomy or think about what dementia might be like in the abstract. But the language and the reality of people fully being free to just speak what they thought.
And to hear some of the people explain their experience of what it feels like to have dementia. I think of the man who talked about having a blank brain. Well,
my brain keeps interrupting me or stopping me.
Yeah, another man saying you notice that I'm pausing. That's because I'm waiting for my brain to catch up with what's going on. And being able to explain their experience so that they can understand.
My number one favorite, I think, and I was honestly laughing a lot when I was going through the transcription, but one of the participants we had she was kind of half or more than half joking around. She was a bit kind of mischievous about it, but sort of like, who even invented this whole dementia thing anyway? And is it really real? Is it really real? I mean, show it to me. What is it really about, right? And
that was a fun conversation.
Yes, I could imagine how much fun that conversation would have been to be in.
She kept going back to it too. It was one of those circular conversations. And she, I've had chicken pox. I know what chicken pox looks like. I've been pregnant.
I know what it's like to be sick, but this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is different. What is dementia? Show it to me.
And then that kind of morphing into kind of an agreement with you that dementia probably doesn't really exist, right? And didn't we kind of prove that dementia doesn't exist? And should we go to the media now and get this published? Because these two ladies here have figured it out, and dementia doesn't really exist. It's not a thing. It probably was made up by some rich doctor somewhere. Came up with this idea.
I wanted to be able to tell me what to do. I don't need anybody telling me what to do.
So it was
interesting. How many people have said dementia's not a big deal?
Yeah.
It's significant. It does. I notice all these changes that are happening to me, and I can describe them. But ultimately, life goes on.
It's not really worth worrying about that much.
Yeah.
Why would I spend time worrying about it? Whereas to me, that was so interesting because we live in a culture where I think there's just a lot of fear of dementia as a condition. And I don't know how many people I've talked to who will just tell me stories about someone that they loved or someone that they knew who got dementia, and then it just seems so terrible. And wow, I hope I never get there. I hope I never have to do that. Or if I do, I hope somebody takes me out and ends my life before I get there. And yet we're talking to people who, many of them I think were significantly advanced in having dementia symptoms.
Many of these people we talked with are no longer living. They were close to the end of their life when we had these interviews.
And
they were still living joyously.
Yes, I'm a happy little kitty cat.
I love that line.
One of our participants says, right? And
one step away from heaven.
I'm just one step away from heaven. I'm cruising along in a happy, smiley environment. Which is not what you would kind of imagine if you just went by sort of cultural stereotypes or something like that.
It's amazing the sense of life being good, and life being simple. I think that the supportive environment and the family support just really led to people having a sense that their life was manageable. That they had the supports in place that they needed in order for life to be simpler than it used to be, but in a very good way.
Yeah. And when we think about autonomy, again, kind of going back to that simplified definition that we're gravitating to of personal autonomy is being able to do what you really want to do. Sometimes, this is what I was seeing quite a bit through this study, sometimes you can do what you really want to do, but you can't do it on your own. But you can do it because you've got all these wonderful, supportive people who are helping you, and the people who are in the care home. I mean, I think this residence that we were focusing on seemed to be I would say a particularly well-managed one. Or at least it just seemed like all of our participants who would comment on it felt very happy about it, that the staff were very attentive. And as you said, also like the family networks. So you can not do things on your own necessarily, but you still can do them with the help of other people. And there's lots of ways to delegate aspects of what you want to happen to other people. And sometimes delegating huge responsibilities and decision-making that some of us, we would often feel a bit nervous delegating that level of responsibility over finances or over big decisions about where we're going to live or things like that. But kind of involving other people in that decision-making process, people who we trust.
That's the key word.
Yeah, who we know are looking out for our best interest, but kind of handing that over to them, and that still being a way precisely to exercise autonomy, especially in a condition where you're kind of recognizing that it's a little bit overwhelming for me to have to think this all through.
Yeah, to be able to get rid of the complexity and be freed of the thinking that had become burdensome, and to know that these people in your life are truly trustworthy, and you can rest assured that things are going to go the way you would want them to go.
Yeah.
The end result, several of them talked about. It's like, I know things are okay because things are turning out right. I'm content here. I know I can trust the people who care about me.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like a naive trust where you're kind of misplacing trust, but a lot of our participants would talk about ways that they were evaluating.
Yes.
They were very aware of the character of the people that they were entrusting things to.
It's very intentional.
So, and that itself being a kind of exercise of agency. I don't think it's really that different from how we live. Like, I mean, you kind of like, through a study of people living with dementia, this comes to the forefront. But when you think about it, like, I think about my own life, and I also love to delegate things. If there's something that I want to get done that I know is beyond my ability to do on my own, or if I was to do it on my own, it would take me a really long time, delegating it to other people is a liberating thing. And when you know that there's people that you can trust who can do this. So I don't think it's like a different type of autonomy, but maybe just in domains that before living with dementia, you might not have felt the need to delegate in those areas, but now you do. So there's a few more areas that you have to delegate to.
It's a reminder to us as humans that independence isn't the ultimate value in life. You don't have to do things completely in a self-reliant way in order to be good humans.
And yet we often kind of hear that independence is such a strongly held value, and that you want to be independent. And now, I mean, you have to kind of analyze what people might mean by that, I guess. But it kind of sounds like, I want to be self-sufficient, I want to be able to do everything on my own, which, to be frank, like, is an illusion. There is no such thing as that.
I wonder if that desire is about freedom. I want to be free. And are there other paths to feeling free? And like you used the word liberated before, and sometimes relinquishing things is liberating.
Yes. And that's what I think we were hearing a lot, right? Was that there's this freedom and sense of well-being that's to be found in being able to let go a little bit and let other people be in charge of some things. Yeah, so that was fascinating, and I think we're kind of trying to put this all together in a paper. We're just about ready to start sending this out to see if it gets published, and so that's what we've been working on, this interpretative phenomenological analysis. And you've done qualitative research before, but had you done interpretative phenomenological analysis, IPA, had you done that before?
I had not used those words, although the more we learned about it, the more I realized, that's kind of what I like to do, to really pay attention to what individual people are saying and to find the meaning in each individual participant as we go along, find their themes, and then only after that taking it to look at the wider group and seeing, are there some things that we're seeing in more than one person, and how do we make sense out of that? And then also playing it back and forth with our own interpretations. How do we interpret with their interpretations of their experience? Lots of interesting dynamics in there.
There were. I found that to be a very fun process. And just to highlight that. So by contrast to a typical thematic analysis, where you would be starting to look for generalizable codes across the transcripts and participants sort of from the beginning. This is like each transcription is its own unit. And I mean, I'm a philosopher, so this is all quite new to me. I've been learning a lot about social science methodology through this whole project, and I mean, my own way into this is through empirical bioethics, knowing that we need to do bioethics in a way that's informed by philosophical considerations and theoretical conceptual stuff. But if you really want to address issues in a way that's highly relevant and attentive to like reality, concrete reality, you have to learn to listen to the empirical and the actual experience of people who you're ultimately talking about in your theories and your theoretical constructs and stuff. So I'm coming at it from that perspective, and I'm finding myself being challenged to do empirical bioethics well as a philosopher is to dive in to the experiential and social scientific stuff, which for me is like jumping into another disciplinary pond that I'm not really trained in. And so I'm a little bit kind of nervous in that water, but I found it to be an amazing experience, and I really actually enjoyed it a lot, although for me it was very time consuming. But each transcript, taking it as a unit and then figuring out the themes within, trying to just deeply get to like what essentially is this person saying across all these different stories, all these different comments and sayings. What are they fundamentally conveying? And then you're going from their own words, but at some point, in order to make sense of it, you're also finding that you have to do this, a bit of sifting and interpretation. So you're kind of bringing some of your own thoughts and frameworks into the construction of the meaning. Just kind of interesting. I don't know, did you want to say anything about that experience for you?
Yeah, similarly. Just having to pay attention to what you're thinking and why, and taking a step back and seeing myself as a reflective person. Am I reading something different into this than the actual person themselves would?
Yeah, you want to avoid that if possible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're kind of like, but you also are a co-constructor of the meaning to some extent too. And it's also interesting. And I just remember the process where after we had got all the themes together from all the participants, kind of breaking it down into these are the main thematic statements for each participant. And then we kind of cut them all out on pieces of paper.
Yeah.
You did that, I did it. We physically had them out on a big table, and then we're just like, okay, so let's start trying to make some connections here. And how did that go in your memory, like building those general connections out of that individual?
It was amazing to see how the general connections that were there and how they evolved through the continual interview process. I did keep each person separately, but as I moved on to interview more and more people, I would be listening, think, that's similar to what this other person has talked about already. That's interesting. And then just tuck that away for the later process when we did that. But yeah, some of those similar themes around being supported by others, trusting others, about that identity piece was there for everyone and connected with storytelling and life experience. What were some of the other themes that came up for us?
Well, I was thinking about the kind of past, present. We talked about the stories of the past a little bit, but this kind of feeling of past and present being, I think we describe it in the paper as like the boundaries between past and present self are porous. Or kind of like the boundary is kind of like dissolving between past and present self in some way. And I think there was an individual who we interviewed who was together with her spouse, who was also kind of a co-participant in that interview. And there's the way that they were talking about how they go places and they do things now, and they live in a place that reminds them of all kinds of things that happened in the past. And that makes them feel like they're home. They're at home. And because in their description, those social interactions were such a part of who they were and what life was. And now they're at a stage in life where they're not having that much active interaction with other people, but just inhabiting the spaces and having reminders of those. It's like they're still living out the same self of who they are in the present, but in the past as well, and they're kind of crossing over. I don't know how to describe that.
It seems to hold and support their well-being and their identity, as though they know they're not going to fall apart because they're here in this city where they lived these substantial identity-forming experiences in their lives, and they think now couch themselves back in this environment where they feel known. The puzzle fit together. They feel so good about that.
Yeah, that one, I mean, that, and so like you were saying, sometimes the general themes, you would kind of be going through one interview and then kind of see, oh yeah, this individual statement seems to be a great example of that general theme that we were kind of noticing elsewhere. But then when you bring in the individualized version or the individualized theme that you thought was representing the general theme, because of the individual way that it's expressed, it kind of has the effect of like transforming the general theme in a way, right? So then it kind of enriches. So that relationship between like what you're saying in general about people living with dementia, based on our 8 participants, and what you're saying about the particular individuals and the particular experience, for me, that was like a really deep thing in this. And I don't know if you shared that or other people on our team shared that, but the way that it came up to me was this thought that in order to really understand a general statement about people living with dementia. The way to that is not by going broad and abstract and generalizing, but it's to go deep into the particular and individual. And somehow you're going to get to the generalized, the real general universal truth about this by getting into the particular individual experiential reality as deeply and fully as you can.
Yeah, the essence of the particular is the big deal.
Yeah. I don't know. I just felt like I was learning that through this process. And maybe that's just something that people already know. It's not really a new thing. But for me, that was like
It's kind of profound.
It felt profound to me. And again, maybe it's like this is most ideas that you have that you think are deep are things that are commonplace for lots of other people already.
Somebody else has thought about it before.
Yeah,
but
exactly. But it still feels
it's important.
It still feels important. Exactly. Yeah. How was this for you? Would you ever do a study like this again? Do you think? Would this be something that you would want to do more of somehow in the future?
I love this kind of work. It's just so fascinating to be able to talk with people on that level. It's such a privilege to be asked to try to understand someone so deeply.
Yeah.
And particularly somebody who's going through an experience that I haven't lived through. Someone living with dementia, that's pretty unique. And we don't know enough about what that's like. Often people living with dementia don't have the opportunity to articulate. They don't get asked about these things.
Yeah.
So that felt like a real privilege.
Coming back to that idea of the initial kind of somewhat reservation about was this going to work or would we be able to do this study? I think at one point I was almost thinking that we were going to have to do this study just by reading memoirs or poetry or things that people living with dementia had written themselves so that we could get at this experience, because I just remember a stage of this process where we were sort of like thinking that this wasn't going to work out or something like that. But I feel like, so there are some sources like that out there by people who are articulate enough and have the wherewithal or the natural ability to write and to express themselves and to get that out into the public somehow. But the way that we did it was going to where people are who otherwise their stories probably wouldn't ever be told in that way. But we have the honor now to try to tell their story and to convey what they're sharing with us.
Yeah, and I hope or wonder anyway if some of what we learned from them would also translate to some people who can't even articulate using words. Maybe some of what we've learned also applies to them, and that we can't hear their voices and understand a bit more about what might be going on for them.
Because that's kind of acknowledging one of the bit of a limitation of our study is that we were sort of like, well, we want to speak to people living with dementia, but we need to be able to have a conversation with them in order to do the study in this way. And then knowing that kind of excludes anyone living with dementia who aren't fully verbal enough to sustain the conversation. And I mean, some of the conversations we had were very fun and interesting, just like a conversation with anybody. There's people who are good conversationalists. There's people who are really funny conversationalists. There's people who don't like to talk that much, but they're willing to sort of concisely say things. Yeah, so we had a bit of a different bunch of experience there. But that's a good thought, that we could be representing through this little study the voices of people who can't speak up for themselves. Potentially, hopefully.
I find that it's already affecting how I engage with people. The learnings are sinking deep in me, and I find myself listening to people differently and conversing with people differently and recognizing some of those themes that the essence of the particular being there in other people's experience and being able to tap into that and seeing the resonance that evokes in people. I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean that in the kind of work that you do, that's natural for that to come up. And for me, where it comes up is maybe more in a conversation that I'll have with somebody who will say like, yeah, my uncle had dementia and he just turned into a shell of himself or something like that. And then kind of just I've always kind of wanted to push back on that, but now I feel like I have a little bit more behind me to push back on it and say, well, actually, like, we talked to a whole bunch of people with dementia and they were very clear. One of the clearest things they said to us is, I'm still here.
I'm still me.
I'm still me. Give me a chance. Right? And that it wasn't like we were really expecting that answer, but that rang out clearly.
Sure did.
In what we heard. Great. Well, it was really fun working with you on this project.
Likewise.
Yeah, and we're going to try to get this one published, and then we'll try to get into phase 3 and phase 4, where we try to start making some of these resources of what we've been looking at in these different papers available for folks who want to support autonomy in various settings where you have people living with dementia, and you might be in charge of making some decisions about how to structure aspects of life, and how could you do that in a way that promotes autonomy in a way that really matters for people living with dementia. So that'll be fun.
You will.
I hope. This has been another Kernel Network podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. We have a chance to read the paper. We'll let you know on our website when it's actually out in the press. I guess that's it. Bye for now.